You want to start introducing ourselves? Why don't we start with Linda?
Hi, I'm Linda Winkler.
Sumi Kailasapati, I'm a City Council member, liaison to the Human Rights Commission.
Leslie Stambaugh, Chair.
Dwight Wilson, Commission member.
Pam Dent, Commissioner.
David Baum, Commission member.
And Graydon Crapel, representative from the City Council.
Howard Lazarus, City Administrator.
And I'm Heather Cook from Human Resources.
Thank you.
Leslie, can I interrupt
Yes.
and just say I happened to open my computer to see an email from Lou.
Yes,
People
right
have seen that?
outside.
Okay, Dwight saw it too.
Oh, I don't know, he's not gonna.
Right.
He's
So,
being held up at a school board meeting.
Oh,
I think it's only Vivian, who we haven't heard from, and Corinne, who we might know might not come. And I think no one needs to, no public comment. Changes and approval of the agenda. Look at the agenda. Does anybody have any comments about the agenda? Any discussion?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
The first point on the agenda is to take advantage of our guest, Howard Lazarus, to talk about current incidents and the report from Hillard Hines, the consultant who is engaged to look over policing in Ann Arbor and the possibility of having some kind of review. Should we start with the incident, the Blake Transit Center incident? Just because we asked questions of the police chief and also because it's an example of something that if there were some kind of review board or something, what would they do in this instance? Because it's something that the community's brought to our attention and something that people are concerned about. We asked a number of questions. I don't think I brought my list of questions, although I have it if I look. Yes, I have an email too.
here.
Or was there anything, rather than going through all of them, was there anything that jumped out at you about that?
I had a number of questions. The first, I'll just go in order.
Okay.
Before the arrest, there was an alleged fight. What were they fighting with? Guns, knives, fists? Or were two or more sides merely talking trash and shouting at each other? I never got any understanding of what that alleged fight was that brought the police in the first place.
There was a fight between two young women who were at the transit center.
So it didn't involve the
Two young
suspect
women.
in content that we're talking about at all? Is that true?
It was a fight between two young women who were at the transit
Just two
center.
young women. Okay.
I can't understand if there was a fight between two women, why he was even stopped in the first place. It never occurred to me that there was a fight between men, women. It's like, I don't get it.
So what's
So the question is, why would the boy be stopped anyway if the fight was between women?
So just to give you a little bit of background, I've watched the video from the body camera up to the point where Mr. Slayton was in the back room at Blake. I've obviously watched the video that was posted on Facebook, and I've also seen the video from the AAATA cameras. So that's my perspective. I've spoken to Chief Barrett. I've read the responses to the questions that he's provided. So my understanding and what I observed from watching the video is that when the police officer was on arrived on scene. There was a group of teenagers kind of hanging around the area, and they were asked to disperse. And there was different degrees of compliance with the request from the officer to move. I don't know exactly what was said that caused the officer to bring Mr. Slayton into the building, but there was, because at that point, fortunately or unfortunately, the body camera fell off. So the only thing that you could see was from that point, was the video from the Blake Center, which was from an inside camera. So I don't know what was said, but I understand that there was a profane comment made about police officers, and the individuals were not fully complying with the police officer's request to disperse. And that's when Mr. Slayton was brought inside.
And no one was armed? None of the boys?
I don't believe any of the teens were armed.
In what you saw, I only saw the first video, and that was sent to me before it was posted. I didn't see any discussion or attempted de-escalation. But again, I wasn't privy to all the videos that you had. So the question is, was there an attempt to de-escalate the situation?
Well, from what I saw, I think there was. Again, I don't know it's hard for me to tell what the specific action was that caused the police officer to pull Mr. Slayton into the building. And I'd also just offer that while Chief Barrett is responding to the questions he got from Chair, I don't think that action is fully completed yet either internally. I know that the report's written. I don't know, from a union contract standpoint, where it stands with that process.
Yeah,
but I do know
that
the investigation contacted just about everyone who was involved except for Mr. Slayton and his mother, because they declined to talk to the lieutenant who was doing the investigation.
Has the chief made any kind of public statement about?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
Since the finding was that there were no charges, so no one was seen as being at fault, was there an apology for the public humiliation?
Not to my knowledge.
I have a question. So the
No,
the
go ahead.
chief said that a few people were red trespass,
Yes.
so that they can't come back for another year, or else they'll be subject to criminal charges. What does being red trespass mean?
Well, that's the trespass, and I'm not an attorney, so I can be very careful, but when a trespass notice is issued, it's generally done by the owner, so that starts as a civil infraction, and then if people don't obey that, then it becomes a criminal infraction.
So, given that the police officer red trespass, how was that?
They're
They're not the owner of the transit center, are they?
They're not.
So, is that trespass notice still applicable to Mr. Slayton?
My understanding is there are no charges.
I know that there aren't any charges, but I
So
think
if you
that
know, so the
Police Chief Barrett has said that the trespass notice still applies to him, and he's not allowed to go back, or else he will be subject to criminal charges.
I don't believe that's true.
That is what Baird said.
That is what Police
When
Chief
did he
Barrett
say
said.
that?
He said that in the answer to the questions.
It was confusing. It depends on how you define what red trespass means. And then Leslie went to the
Do you
ordinance.
have it?
And I think it's what Vivian said, when someone's red trespass, it means they are basically given notice that if they do show up at that location again, then they will be considered in
Right.
violation, and it's a crime. And if the boy was red trespassed by an officer, that means he was put on notice that he can't come back. That's my understanding.
Yeah, it said, his response is that no one received a citation for trespass. Some unseen were red trespass.
It's a way for a subject to be officially notified that they may not return to a specific location. Refusing to leave after that is read or returning at a later date within a year are both criminal violations with the potential to be arrested. This did not occur as the parties complied. So it appears to me that there are any criminal complaints pending against Mr. Slayton, but that he's not physically allowed to be at the Blake Transit Center, or else he will be charged. But under what authority was he read trespass?
So it's my understanding that the AAATA has not pursued any trespass violation.
But it seems to me that, and I think Police Chief Baird agrees with that.
Right.
But I think he is stating that the police officers read him trespass, and that notice still applies, and that if Cain goes back, he might still be subject to criminal charges. And why is that?
I don't believe that's the case,
Okay.
though.
But that is the
That
thrust
is
of
exactly
the-
what he said, huh?
That is the thrust of the email that
Well,
was
but it would be
just
nice to
read.
know. It was a little confusing. It would be nice to know. I mean, that to me was also.
Because are
troubling
police
thing.
officers even imbued with the authority to tell individuals that they're not allowed to be in public locations if only the owners of the locations are allowed to read trespass?
So I'm going to defer because I'm not an attorney and I'm
okay.
not going to
Let's see.
answer the question
Yeah,
because I don't want to mislead or
Yeah,
speed into it.
But that is my understanding.
That police officers can for public areas, or?
Well, it's my understanding that that's what they would do. For example, if you started a fight in a bar, then the bartender would call the police and ask that trespass be read to the person and told, but I never knew that you could do it. I'm not an attorney either. But I didn't think you could, a private party could, a public accommodation like IATA could do it.
Yeah, or
That's right.
You mean that a police officer could not do it
I
at
didn't-
a public?
I
venue?
thought that the bar owner, if it were a private establishment, the owner of the establishment would ask the police for, is that right?
So my understanding, let me just say, I'm an attorney, so is Vivian. I am not familiar with the trespass statute in Ann Arbor. What I know based on my experience in other contexts, actually specifically at the University of Michigan, is that if there is somebody on the property of the University of Michigan who should not be there or needs to be put on notice that he or she should not be there, the University of Michigan police are called and they read trespass to that individual, and then if the individual returns after that, then it is a violation. Then the person can be cited. And I'm assuming that this is analogous to that, but again, I haven't read this statute, so don't know
So
for
you
a
would-
fact that that's how it
You
works.
would think that AATA would
So-
have had to ask for it, or?
Well, I don't know whether AATA would have had to ask for it.
So my concern with that, though, is that it seems that it means that the result is the same. Kaim's not able to use public transit and
Not
might
necessarily-
still.
Or
no.
the Blake Transit.
The Blake Transit
Just the
Center. He's
center.
not able to use the Blake Transit Center, and he's not able to access public transit from that location, or else he will be subject for criminal
Right.
That's what it
charges.
sounds like, but we need to
For
find out.
maybe possibly no reason.
For a
Like
year.
it says under here that the University of Michigan trespass statute says that officers may use their discretion to read trespass if an individual has committed a crime, refuses or fails to comply with established university rules, et cetera, et cetera. What did he do here that was against any sort of?
That is a question.
That's the question.
That's a
And
good
we need to
question.
find out. You know, to me, what this showed, what we're doing now is what whatever
Thank
she's
you.
calling it, co-produced policing
Committee.
should do. If something like this happens, we're not, we're stepping in because there isn't one, but if there were, this would be exactly the kind of discussion they could have with the police and questions. So, and so when the police chief issues a report saying we've investigated it, we find that, the officer acted appropriately, even gently, or however I don't know if he put that in the public letter. That's
It is
fine,
not
but
a
that's
public
basically
letter.
like saying to the public, trust us. Because there's nobody, but there are no members of the community are privy to exactly what that investigation involved. He said what they reviewed, but he's saying we reviewed this and this is our finding, period. If there was another group that could ask more questions and maybe be privy to some of the facts. I mean, this is a case involving a kid, so it shouldn't be, it should be privately handled in a discreet way. To me, it's a perfect example of why we need
I don't know that
some other committee.
but like privately handled is not exactly correct, right? It needs to be handled in a public transparent
No,
way.
but there could be a group of people asking the questions.
Yeah.
Here, we're on television right now, and talking about a kid, and to me, that's.
I think the statement you made that when we progress to having the
Right.
community co-policing commission, or whatever we choose to call it,
Right.
and that's in place, I think review of procedures, and something Chief Barrett agrees with,
Right.
is something that's wholly appropriate. Reviewing actions that are taking in somewhat of a generic sense
Mhm.
is wholly appropriate. Remember that when the police do this kind of investigation, it's about whether or not the police officer was or was not in compliance with policy. That doesn't speak towards whether or not the conditions that led up to it may or may not have been handled appropriately, and whether or not the situation could have been avoided by better communication between the police department and the community.
It isn't
Right.
even clear to me though, like, to what policies were applicable here. Like, he says that under their policies, like, everything was fine, but even us, we're entitled, we have more information than a member of the public does.
Right.
Like, it's just making conclusory statements that this was fine under police policy and procedure. But I don't even know, like, what policies or procedures applied here, or why they were fine. Like, there's just no information about that at all.
So I think that's a reasonable question to ask, and one that we should respond to.
Right.
Yeah.
I-
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think it was really unfortunate that he said that it was handled gently. For those of us who have sons, to imagine that one of them is face down on the ground and handcuffed when he hasn't done anything, that was a violation according to what we heard from the investigation. And that's general handling. It's astonishing.
Well, what Chief Barrett responded to, he said, if anything, the actions taken by the officer in this case were on the lower end of that range, which the range being the actions that are defined within their use of force policy.
Which no one has seen, by the way.
Well, one of the goals, one of the objectives of the co-policing commission is to review police procedures and policies. To the extent that some of them may have concern that they would tell an entity who, as for example, someone with who acts in the manner of a terrorist, and as it relates to civil disturbances, just because they are things that the police may not want to have distributed doesn't mean that a subgroup of that commission still couldn't review them separately. So, it is important, and I would agree with the with the point of view that's being expressed, that the public, particularly youth, need to understand what are the procedures the police will use when they're brought into a situation where there is, on the surface, disorderly conduct, as an example. And that's part of the goal of where we're going, is to try and get to where we can de-escalate and defuse those kind of situations before they result in a use of force, whether that's appropriate or not. And I'm not going to make a statement on that. I'm just saying that,
Right.
that the goal is to get to the point where the mutual respect between members of the community and the police are there, so that we don't get into this kind of situation.
Is it my imagination that I saw gently on there? Or
No, it's there.
No, it was there in answer to one of our questions. I don't know if it was in the letter he sent to the city council.
I
I
don't
don't know.
know.
No,
Gently?
he's looking at the letter, and so.
I'm just looking at the responses to the questions.
It does say gently somewhere.
Yeah, it was in response. He said some people would say, or something like this.
I just searched, I'm looking at the document with the red and
Yes,
in red,
that's it.
and I just searched on gently, and it did not find it. What I saw was the
Gentle.
language. Pardon?
Gentle.
Oh, gentle.
Most of the feedback I've seen
Ah.
and received has been highly supportive of the officer's actions, and with several
Ah,
describing
right.
the risk of this
That's right.
So
Okay,
people
I
have
see.
described the
It's in
police
hazard.
officer's action as gentle.
I'm not sure.
And also, where's that feed-
What Chief Barrett said there is that most of the feedback he's got has characterized the action taken as gentle.
That's inflammatory.
who has gotten this
It's
feedback from?
inflammatory.
I
Well,
don't
let me-
know
let me-
these
I will go back and tell you what I saw in the video
Yeah.
from the AAATA. When he brought Mr. Slayton in and was going to apprehend him, there was a gesture that Mr. Slayton made that I think resulted in him brushing against a police officer's face. And you know, it's hard for me to sit here and judge a police officer feeling whether they feel threatened or not. So in the overall scope of how people are placed on the ground and arrested, that one was more on, and to Mr. Slayton's credit, he was cooperative. So it was done in a way where no one was hurt.
So he was cooperative, and being cooperative leads to someone having a taser pulled on them?
Well, the taser, my understanding is the officer pulled the taser because the crowd around him wasn't following his direction. The taser was not pointed at Mr. Slayton, and
Oh,
from
so
what I
the
saw,
taser was pointed at
in the video, that's correct. And as soon as the crowd moved back, he reholstered his taser. Again, that's my observation from what I saw.
So how many, I think I missed this as I was walking in, but how many of the individuals involved in the altercation have the police been able to speak to?
Chief Barrett provided a list of who they spoke
Yeah.
to, and I don't know that the two young women who were involved are on that list.
Were any of the other teenagers?
Some
I think
others
he
were
said only
ready to
two were willing
trespass.
to.
Ooh, one of the
Interview with
teens.
one of the teens, additional refused participation in an interview.
Yep.
So at this point, do we know how many people have been read trespass, and if those trespass readings still apply to them?
He just said some.
Some, so we don't know.
Some on the scene
Do
were
we
read
know,
trespass.
do we know why they were read trespass?
No,
Okay.
I don't.
Mhm.
So if your
But there's
question,
no
I think the
crime
question,
involved so far. I mean,
Yeah, like what actions led to the reading of trespass?
well, there is behavior that apparently, and I don't want to speculate, so maybe I should answer the question, but what is true is that there was a comment made that you can't ride the bus, and that was not correct, and that has been corrected. And my understanding is that there are no trespass charges standing, so that there are
There
no
aren't any
restrictions.
trespass charges,
We
but they
know
have
that.
been read trespass, so if they do go back, they will be subject to criminal charges.
yeah.
So I
Potentially.
think I think the answer to that question I stated before is, I don't have the facts, so I'm not going to speculate, so so it's a reasonable thing to ask us to respond to.
If I may, earlier you made reference to if, based on the Hillard-Hines report, that there is subsequent action taken where there is some committee formed, that perhaps in situations like this, or even different, that a subcommittee might be formed to look into concerns and perhaps be given access to information that isn't publicly known. So for example, the reference was made to, we don't know what the policy is for example, refusing a police officer's command. My question is, in the interest of transparency, which we have all said that we want to ensure governs going forward, why that information would not be publicly known so that any individual is knowledgeable about what governs in any situation, rather than finding out after the fact and learning to their detriment or harm that they are in violation of said policy or policies. So my question speaks to not just a subcommittee or even the commission, but the general public be made privy to what really governs. We can look online or Google or however, things that speak to specifics. For example, your job description. It's a poor example, but I'm just saying, we don't have to guess.
I'm hurt by that.
But my point is this, that's known and readily accessible. Why do we have to, I'm going to use a vernacular here, scuba dive and learn after the fact what we should know beforehand, if for no other reason than to ensure that we're compliant, rather than learn that we're now in violation of and then suffer the consequences.
So I want to just be clear about what I said. There may be some procedures and policies that the police department, with good reason, would have concern that it would reveal their tactics in addressing a specific situation that poses great danger to the public that could be reviewed by a separate subcommittee. That would be a rare occasion. However, their general policies should be reviewed and open to public scrutiny, and it's one of the things that as we form the commission and we put them out, they can be reviewed in an open and transparent way so the public is informed as to expectations.
Will there be a public report available after the results of this for the results of this investigation?
You know, the police investigation is a personnel matter, so I think we need to be careful about that.
But something like this would be addressed in the future, right, by the panel you were just saying?
It can be addressed, I think, in a general way, but not necessarily specific to an incident.
So there will never be a public report in this case?
I don't know that that's true. I think once I am aware that the report is finalized and I am comfortable with what should be shared, I think based on the amount of community interest, I think it would be remiss on my part if I didn't forward something.
Yeah, because
that sounds elusive, and I'm not trying to be. What I'm saying is that
It's a minor.
there should be there should be a discussion of facts that led up to it, and then how we go forward. But I don't know that I would do anything that would
This is not a,
would address
private thing. We've all
matters
seen
of
the
privacy.
video.
Well,
Is it?
so what I will say is, and I think this is what Linda was getting at also, is that there are competing interests here. There's the public's interest in, in a situation like this, like knowing as much as there possibly is to be known. At the same time, the young man who is involved in this is a minor, and he has rights as well. And so I suspect that, again, this is all hypothetical, if there were a co-produced policing committee that was engaged in this, part of the discussion would likely be, what is it, all right, now that we have explored this, what parts of this can be made public, what cannot be made public, taking into account, the competing interests, or the multiple interests, some of which compete, that are at stake here. And so that's I think what the difficulty is with this particular matter.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I think
And
if you have the co-producing this commission, I think the goal of it is that we're not in situations like this, and that the commission works with the police department. And when you read Chief Baird's, he brings that up. What policies can we review that we can get out? What's the best information? What's the best way to go about interacting with the community to ensure that how do we prevent these things from happening? And they have an interest in doing that as much as anybody else. And that's probably one of the biggest goals of this group when you look at the recommended composition of it and everything. How do we prevent these things from happening? So we're on the front end of it, and we're not trying to figure out, who shot John, afterwards, and whose story do we have and don't. But how do we get in front of it? How do we make sure that the information that can be released or we can share, it has public input and it's out there, and how do we build the proper channels between the different communities in our city, so everybody feels they're a part of it and they understand, and everybody's treated the same and equal no matter what. And and that there is a good understanding out there. And if we're proactive about it, how do we get into schools so kids know the best way to interact with the police officer who's talking to you? How, you know, what's the best way to doing that? And I think that's, for me, what we need to look at as policemen is how do we get ahead of things? How do we make it so we're not dealing with these issues and we can put them behind us and we can take a more progressive view on how, in terms of policing in the future and in the 21st century. So we get beyond this.
Sure, like ideally, right? But like, things are always going to happen. Like, I think ideally we'd like to be preventative, but there are always going to be incidents.
I think part of it will be, I agree with what Graydon said, I agree with you said, with what you just said too, Vivian. I think sometimes the way to be proactive is to learn from history, right? And so hopefully one of the processes that such a committee could be engaged in is to take a look at maybe something that's happened in the immediate past that is people are reacting to immediately, but maybe take a look at you know, historically, what are the sorts of things that happened, what are the causes, and what are the creative ways that we can take that information and put it out so that prospectively people understand you know, why the police is doing what it's doing, what behavior causes the police to react in certain ways, and how can the police and the community interact most constructively to minimize the likelihood that these things
I think one of the things that would be really helpful in the public report, in any public report that is released that addresses some of those concerns and addresses how to move forward, is an explanation of what being red trespass is and what you can be red trespass for.
Exactly.
Even because I didn't know that that was a thing that existed until this. I think most of us.
And you're an attorney.
So if I could, and try and maybe put things in a little bit of context. One of the things that Chief Barrett and I did talk about as a result of the investigation was very much what you have raised about whether or not the reading, what does this mean to be red trespass? Because I'm not sure that I still understand that either. And I think it's an explanation that as the individual responsible for oversight of the police department, I owe that conversation back to the community because I have gotten numerous requests. But I do want to talk about also the Hillard Hines report in its general context, because the co-policing commission is just one aspect of what's in there. And I find you have to read the report more than once to really appreciate what is in there. And while it will not satisfy 100% of the people on the 100% of the issues, I think there are things in there that address police soft skills training, as well as the fact that they are very well trained unit tactically. It also expresses the police officers' desires to be better connected with the community. It addresses some of the way that personnel matters are addressed through the police department, and some changes that we may need to make there as well. So there are, I think, 5 or 6 different areas of recommendations that that we will have presented next week. The report, Heather has a couple of hard copies. I sent it to council and the chair of the Human Rights Commission. It should be posted on the city's website tomorrow with a public notice of its availability and a media notice of its availability. The final report, I only received the final report late Friday. My intent was to get it made public as quickly as I could to respect the public's request for transparency and openness. We put it out over a week before the joint session between council and the Human Rights Commission, so you and members of the public who are interested have the opportunity to read it, digest it, and then ask questions that they have over it, but to do it in a way that is informed. The meeting next Thursday is down at CTN. It will be televised, and it's at CTN because it's probably the only room big enough for all the commissioners to sit at. And it'll start at 7. I'll make a little bit of an introduction to discuss how we got to where we are, and then Ms. Kirby from Hillard Hines will talk 20 to 30 minutes or so on the content. That's half an hour out of 2-hour meeting. We have to stop by 8:45 for public comment, but I don't believe that means we can't take public comment before that point if we're ready. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay.
The mayor can make a.
But we have to stop by 8:45. So I would hope that that provides ample opportunity to have a informed and meaningful conversation about the contents of the report. The timing of the report is helpful in that we are starting our budgeting process. So, and I've spoken to Chief, if there are things that we need to do, we are not going to beforehand resource constrain ourselves. It may be that we need to look and see where we can prioritize to add additional resources to the police to affect the recommendations. I've also will intend to bring back to council an amendment to Hillard Hines' contract, which will give us the opportunity to access them as a resource on an as-needed basis down the road.
Mm-hmm.
And also, one of the items that was in the original request for proposals, as we remember, is a follow-up review a year to year and a half afterwards to see if we actually have implemented what was in the report. So while the report may not be all things to all people, it is a good starting point. Mm-hmm. It was done with I hope, what's considered an inclusive process. And I know from the city staff standpoint, we're committed to using it as a launching point to improve, to get to the original intent, which was to evaluate and improve the outreach methods, community engagement methods that the police department has. And again, when you read through the report, a lot of where we are was done because of budget cuts and reduction in staff. Remember, the number of uniformed police officers today is a little more than half of what it was a decade ago. So a lot of the operational changes that were made were as a result of that. But we also live in a time where we have much better data, which can help inform staffing and operational procedures as well. So those are the items that are in the report that hopefully we can have a discussion about, then use that as a guide as we go down the path of creating the co-policing commission and establishing it in the method and really the image that we have for it.
So, 2 questions. Like the
Sure.
first one might be dumb, but in this 2-hour meeting, the first 30 minutes are a presentation by Hillard Hines. The last 15 are a Q&A, and the intervening time is a discussion between city council.
Well, the council and the commissioners of the Human Rights Commission will have the opportunity to engage in questions and discussion. Discussion among yourselves, as well as using Ms. Kirby as a resource since she'll be there. So you're really looking at about half an hour presentation and an hour to hour and 50 minutes of discussion and a minimum of 15 minutes of public comment and input.
Is that written in stone? I wonder if we should have more time for public comments, or can you not do that?
That's how it's set up by council rules.
By council rules, okay.
Yeah, and because the work sessions are supposed to be 2 hours long, and they want to make sure
Okay.
there's always enough time for public comment at the end,
comments.
no matter what.
Okay.
Because we'll stop work
Okay.
sessions.
Got it.
and public
Yeah,
comment.
but at the same time, if there are 20 people
Oh,
who
yeah,
want
we
to
know.
comment, we will sit
We'll
and
sit there,
listen. We are
yeah.
not going
Oh,
to
I
stop
see.
them at 50.
We won't cut
So
them off
there's
at
no-
5 o'clock.
Even
We
though
don't.
it's,
But-
okay.
Mr. Lazarus, I do have a question for you.
Sure.
When Vivian raised the issue whether there was going to be a report after the investigation is over, you said this was a personnel matter. Part of it, I think there was a 3-tiered investigation as far as Mr. Chief Beard said. It was a complaint driven, one was an internal personnel. So I don't see it as just a personal investigation, meaning did this police officer violate the blah, blah, blah? Did he follow? I understand that aspect of it. I see that as a component of a larger issue. There's a larger public issue. Here is an African-American young man, and rightfully so. I mean, it's not just the African-American community. There is a lot of white people who have come up to me and asked, is there any racial component to it? Is there kind of systematic discrimination in this community? So there's a larger public, what is the word? There's a larger public interest in this issue that I think we need to make sure that we put out there. I mean, it's not to say that young kid's name, or even though it's all out there, kind of, it's a moot point at this point. But what I'm trying to say is there's a larger issue overarching the personal issue. You can resolve the personal issue with a personal investigation. But I personally really feel, I have got so many calls and emails regarding this, that they do want to see what led to this. Was this right? I mean, so there is a larger public issue where I think it is best that we don't just relegate it as a personal issue, and investigation is done, all rules were followed, everything is good, trust us, versus kind of really going through the steps and what went right, what went wrong. I mean, it's not an indictment of the police force, but rather bringing transparency and accountability to a process, because I don't think in this day and age we can just say everything went well, trust us. Doesn't really cut it anymore, right?
So I agree.
Okay.
I agree. Let me, if I could bring one other item up, and I mentioned this to your chair when we spoke earlier today. We are partnering with county in a contract with the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, or GARE. The goal of that collaboration, in addition to some training that we've received, is to develop an equity ordinance and an equity policy consistent with both the county and the city. And it may also be something that this commission may choose to want to know about. So that is a process that council has approved the contract. That process is ongoing, and it may be something that we can come back and present to as to where we're going.
I don't want to cast dispersions on the young man. I didn't even write his name. I had 10 questions here, and I didn't even put his name in that because I do want to protect his privacy. But when we look at people with mental issues, they're not just those who have graduated from high school. And so sometimes the police are finding themselves in a situation with somebody who is young and may not be responding the way he or she wants them to respond. It doesn't mean, I would like to believe, I agree with these two gentlemen here who suggested that what we're trying to do is get ahead of the curve. That's how I try to live my life, and especially when I have 4 sons and 2 grandsons and I don't know how many nephews. I would like to believe that they are not going to find themselves in a situation where 2 girls were in a fight and they are on the ground. I would like to believe that. I would like to believe that if the young man had been the quarterback of the Wolverines, or your son or a city council person's son, the same thing would have happened. But there are people who are asking me about this situation who think that he was profiled because he was black. And I was taken aback when you told me that it wasn't even boys that were in the alleged fight. It's like, okay, now how do we get from point A to point B?
Mr. Wilson, when we had the last community engagement meeting over at Bryant Center, the question came up about bias, and I think we all need to recognize that there's bias among all of us. And part of this discussion will help us recognize that and understand why behavior is the way it is. In this particular case, and your chair and I talked about this a little bit this afternoon, it was in fact an African-American officer who was engaged, but part of the question then becomes it's not so much about race as it is about acculturation and within a police department.
Exactly.
So there are issues that I think we need to address that require us, this commission, council, to set an example of how we're going to have honest conversations and address equity throughout our community. That also addresses, to some extent, parental responsibility for how kids behave in a public setting. And teenagers sometimes tend to not think about the consequences of their actions as well. But I can't answer your question as to whether it was racially motivated or not. I don't know the answer to that. I know that there are times where that is in fact a component of how people react. So by addressing the police department's community engagement practices, we can help work towards better understanding. But by working through the GARE process, we can understand all of our own implicit biases and work towards not having them affect our decisions quite as much as they do. So I think I look to the Hillard Hines report as a great, it's a step along the way. It tells us things, it holds a mirror up to us, and there are some things in there we probably don't like to see, but it's also honest and tells us the things that we are doing well. And part of that also talks about community mental health, and it addresses needs for training there. But when you look at what the voters in Washtenaw County just approved, there's opportunities as well. So none of these things is considered in isolation. This report and the actions that we're going to take, though, can provide some meaningful output to improve the community and for us to be what we aspire to be.
I also didn't, I know we're going to have to move on, so I didn't want to suggest that the officer was acting racist. My question was, did race play a role, which is you suggested? And we know that in the Freddie Green situation in Baltimore, most of those cops that killed him were black. So that bias, living in a racist society, all of us share in that.
I agree.
All of us share in that.
Do you know if the family of Chaim Sladen have they been talked to? Have they been explained what the consequences are of trespass and what he is or isn't allowed to do, and whether or not there's an appeal process for the trespass citation?
So I do know that they were reached out to and they did not want to speak to the police investigator.
Okay. Is there an appeal process for trespass? And
He doesn't even know if it is.
We'll have to find
I can tell you that the school, I think the school has reached out to make sure that there was transportation for him. I don't know
Yeah.
how,
but that doesn't.
Yeah.
no, it doesn't answer.
No, I understand your question.
Yeah.
As I said before, I think as part of it,
You didn't know.
I need to respond to it.
Yeah. Is this like a part of, is reading trespass, is that part of the municipal code? Is that part of the
Or state statute.
Do you
Is it
happen to know
criminal
what that is?
statute?
Like it's
No, I had to look it up, so
yeah.
and even then, the best answer for me to provide you is I understand what you're looking for, and I need to, as council members asked, to put this into some sort of report that addresses the whole situation, not just the specifics of the internal police review. And I did receive a goodly number of questions about trespass, so there's clearly a need to clarify what it means.
Thank you.
I think that this whole conversation points out again how important it is for a group that is not a police group to be able to review some incidents and be able to say something about them, not right or wrong, not he should be fired, but perhaps their policies are going to be changed as a result of this, or we're rethinking what might be best practices, or this was important, this was done this way for some good reasons and give some good reasons. I mean, because people don't believe the police can police themselves, and something as sketchy as the chief has to say is not good enough. What bothers me about the report, and I think the report is very good in a number of instances, and I've only read about 60 pages of it, so I have more to read, but I did scan the other recommendations. I do not see any place in this report where the group that would be formed has the right to review complaints or any incidents. And if that's the case, we've got to put it in.
Yeah,
The report provides recommendations. It's our decision as a community how we choose to act on those.
So I think following up on that question, like I've read through this whole thing, but only very briefly, and it seemed to me that the thrust of this was more perspective and future thinking about the community being involved in setting goals and setting, best practices, and then having sort of like yearly check-ins to see if the police department was meeting those stated goals. But beyond that, like if an incident happened, if another RR roster happened, or if another County Slayton incident happened, like maybe I wasn't reading carefully enough, but does the co-community policing board have any ability to review specific incidents and enforce anything out of that?
And not only
This is a
that,
work in
you don't know
progress.
enough
Yeah.
unless you have that information and you see what policies are being used and whether
Because
what you're adopting.
so it
I
seems
think
to
these
me
are
that
some
this
of the
board-
questions you should ask Deborah when,
Yeah.
Yes.
what
Well,
she's
I
thinking about
think
this.
I'll be clear,
Okay.
there are legal aspects to reviewing specific cases.
Mhm.
There are contractual aspects of reviewing specific cases. One of the issues that's addressed in the report is the role of the city administrator in resolving personnel matters, which right now I have no role in by contract. There are a lot of things in here that we can address. I would be uncomfortable with reviewing individual cases in a specific manner, but not a generic or general manner. To look at causes.
Not you, but like the board. I assume you've read this much more thoroughly than I have. But in reading this, I was under the impression that the board only has a perspective function.
But you can't look forward unless you understand why things occur, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yes,
think,
but I agree, but
Right.
in a sense that like a board could have two different functions, one that focuses on specific particular incidents, and it could also be forward looking. But it seems to me that this model is only forward looking. Is that correct?
my partner in this process has been our city attorney.
Mm-hmm.
And to the extent that we legally can do things that improve the relationship, I think Mr. Postum will support that. But again, I think this is not a board that will review individual disciplinary actions that are taken against police officers.
So, in many cities, most cities that have oversight or review boards, that is their only function, is to either receive the complaints themselves and then have access to at least some elements of the internal standards investigations to make sure they're done well, so that there is some oversight of what the police investigation of their own behavior, that it's being done well. And so I'm surprised to hear this. I know that so there are ways of keeping the information confidential. You can assign numbers to police officers. You can do things to black out people's
Redact.
names,
Yes.
and still have this group review to make sure that it was fairly and in an unbiased way conducted. So I hate to think that that's not going to be a part of this, because that's what got us started us down this road in the first place, was that if there's a complaint filed with the police, currently the police will conduct an investigation. They will tell the complainant whether it's sustained or not, and nobody outside the police, except maybe you, I don't know, have access to anything having to do with the investigation.
So my response to that is there is a discussion within the report of models that have succeeded and models that have failed.
Right.
And I would invite you to take advantage of Ms. Kirby's experience when she speaks to us next week to ask those kind of
Okay,
questions.
that's fine.
And just a quick question regarding clarification on my part for the meeting next week. So once the report is, of course, made public, and during that meeting, or maybe I should say subsequent to the meeting, will we know what direction will take place going forward? Specifically, like, will they adopt the recommendations? Or during the discussion, if something comes up that is sufficiently significant does it have the potential to maybe change what may ultimately be decided? Or just what will govern once that meeting has occurred and next steps?
I made a comment to City Council several months ago that we are at a point where we need to own this report and not look to external entities anymore to figure out how we want to implement it.
Mm-hmm.
So certainly the challenge that will come from the discussion next week are next steps and how we move forward to implement the recommendations that are in here in a way that we're comfortable with doing. So between now, one of the things that I would like to do when we meet next week after Ms. Kirby speaks is to wrap her remarks up with a discussion of next steps that frames part of the discussion that'll ensue. But we didn't go through this process and devote a significant amount of taxpayer resources to it to just have it sit on the shelf either.
Mm-hmm.
So the form and substance and even the critical decision as to who would be the chair of the commission are important things to do, how we get there from here.
Mm-hmm.
We had talked about the commissioners on the co-policing commission going through a version of the Community Police Academy, as well as going on ride-along with police officers and I think Mr. Wilson even brought that up at a meeting we were at, as some of the conditions for training.
Absolutely.
So that they can go in. Discussions about things on the typical commission training as well, with open public records and FOIA and those things would come as well. So we're going to go through a process to implement the recommendations. The same is true for the HR matters that are addressed in here, meaning human resources, not human rights. But also the training programs that would be, the additional training that would be required, as well as some of the practices in here that are mentioned towards hiring and recruiting.
Mm-hmm.
I
So
would think we would also like to talk
Sure.
among ourselves and make recommendations. We've all read it.
Absolutely. So when will the report be made public? Tomorrow, you said?
I'll post it tomorrow.
Okay.
At least that's the instruction I gave.
Do you know if there'll be posts made on social media too about the meeting next week?
I had asked communications director to do that, to make public notice, but I will follow up with him to also ensure we do it not just in the traditional media release, but also put it on
Yeah,
social
I see
media
that
sites.
public meetings for the 16th, 28th, and 30th about the zoning ordinance have been publicized on social media, so I think that it would also be a good idea to put, to inform the public of this meeting as well.
I agree.
Thank you for shepherding us through this whole process.
Mhm.
Yes,
With
thank
hiring
you.
Hillard Hines and going forward and really taking it up and making it happen.
So, the process was, I think, is reflective of where we need to go, and then we have to stretch our comfort levels. I have never before had non-city employees evaluate a request for proposal. I've had participation in forming the scope of work, but not to the extent that we went through. And I've never had the scoring done by non-city staff. So that's one example of stretching.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in the end, our goal was not to have something that had a preconceived outcome to it. And while we all didn't agree with everything every step along the way, I think what did come from that, with those of us who participated, is a higher degree of trust. And that'll be important as we move forward.
May I ask one more question and comment on something you said earlier? So with respect to oversight or review of complaints against the police, the way I read the report is that there are some very significant legal constraints on the ability of a co-produced policing committee or any other body, quite frankly, that is not the city administrator and the chief of police, to be involved in having actual direct impact on those sorts of processes and decisions. But what I understood you to say at one point a few minutes ago was that look, the scope of what the co-produced policing committee, if we go that direction, or whatever the body is, can do, is for the city of Ann Arbor to decide. The commission, this commission, the city council, public input. And even if this means that unless the law is changed, there is no way to directly be involved in a way that has impact with teeth, as somebody might say, about decisions. Certainly one possible set of duties of whatever this body is would be to figure out how to review things and at least make recommendations. Make recommendations to the city administrator, make recommendation to the police chief, not about what might happen in a particular case, that seems perhaps unrealistic, but given what happened, what are the things going forward that should be done about it in light of what happened, right? So I'm speaking hypothetically. Even though this doesn't say that this is going to be a complaint review board, certainly you know, the city could decide, we all could be part of deciding as this forms, to play some sort of constructive role within what within what the law allows. That's what I understood. That's what I understood you to, I think in response to Vivian, say you made a comment along the lines that we get to decide.
I wasn't nearly as articulate, but that was the intent.
Or long-winded.
If I could, one other thing which I did not mention is the report also addresses the better use of data in decision making. And one of the things that we are doing we will do separately from this report is do an evaluation of police arrest data. The Chief and I have talked about that. We chose to do it outside this report really because of a cost issue more than anything else. And I think we could do it more efficiently with people who are number crunchers as opposed to the highly qualified consultants, therefore more expensive consultants that are in Hillard Hines. So the end result of the report is to serve as a starting point for how we want to engage on a number of fronts with not necessarily it is going back to having a police force that's highly engaged with the community. And there's a desire not only on the community's part, but also on the individual police officer's part. And I would be remiss if I didn't comment that without the openness and cooperation of the Ann Arbor Police Agency, both uniformed and non-uniformed staff, that we would not have a successful outcome. So speaks strongly about the quality of individuals that are there, as well as their desire to move forward in a way that helps us live up to those things we aspire to be.
Yeah, and to build on that, the response we got from Chief Baird was so much more than we've been able to get in the past. He's really been very cooperative, given that he's got constraints, and we haven't made a decision about anything yet. But you can see that things might be changing, and that would be nice.
I'd like to thank you, as you've been thanked once before, but I'd like to thank you for the fact that you've been quite upfront about the fact that this is not the voice of God, this report that we have, and that it's just a start. And there are people who are going to read it and say, well, this is what's going to happen. And that's why there's so much nervousness even in this room, because oversight isn't here, et cetera. But from what you've told me from the beginning, they're doing a study, but we have to own it.
I asked Ms. Kirby to take the recommendations and put them in a table at the end of the report, so that can start to be a way for us to track where we are. And there will be accountability through the process as to where we are on the different recommendations, whether we embrace them and adopt them, whether we modify them, or if we choose not to pursue them. But I think as your city administrator, I have an obligation to show that the expenditure of city funds was not for naught.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stay.
Thank you.
Well, You're welcome to stay, but it gets less interesting now.
I'll reserve the right to leave when
Okay.
it strikes me.
The next thing on the agenda is the approval of the October minutes.
I think the move's just
I have just one more change.
Okay.
Under 3, guest presentations A. We have LGBTQ everywhere but there. There should be
Oh.
a Q there too.
Yeah.
Isn't there one?
Right here.
I see where it is, yeah.
Anything else? You've all read these, right?
Mhm.
Okay. Can we have a motion?
I'll move to adopt these October minutes with that one amendment.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
By the way, I like the fact that the language that we discussed last time about where to find the full content
on
of
it.
the meeting is at the end of the minutes.
Yeah.
That's good.
Yes, that is, do you agree that that's what we said?
I believe it is what
Okay,
we said.
okay. You had more, but we didn't say that we wanted all of that.
No, and I can amend it however you guys want.
I took it out.
That was from, you did take it out, okay. That was from the other commissions.
Right,
So
right.
I just copied the same
Yeah.
language with all the locations.
So Heather, you have the most recent amended one that Leslie attached to the materials?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Communications and promotion.
Well, I can talk about the website.
Talk about the website.
So, Nancy, who just left, did finally review checked with, and I think Stephen Postuma too, looked over the list of resources, gave the okay, so then I sent it off to Lisa, who immediately made it happen. So if you go to the website, I mean, it's still is a work in progress, but I think the organization's better, and the resources are there, and you know, we had asked her to kind of figure out a way to highlight how to file a discrimination complaint, and she has to work with some template for all these pages and was not able to do that. But what she did suggest is you'll find the link to filing complaints immediately under whatever the first heading is, commission's work. And it says, what does it say, filing discrimination complaints?
Filing discrimination complaints is the very first link.
And if you click on it, it takes you down to below where you can get the information.
All the different forms.
So that's, yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
So, but you should look it over, and she or maybe Heather has access to the site if there are small changes. I know Lisa had said, Lisa had said you did, I don't know.
I don't know, I did look into that,
Yeah.
and I can't find that, but
Okay.
I can reach out to her.
Well, just, it's up to you and her to decide, you know, if they're a little small thing, whether we should send it to her or ask you, whatever you guys want.
Okay, yeah, I'll talk to her.
Yeah, but so when you have time, just look it over and see if you have any suggestions. It can definitely be always improved, so.
Okay.
Just one actual question. So going back to the CTN thing on the minutes.
Yeah.
Have there been any videos posted from this calendar year?
They're all
Oh, they're all
posted.
there.
Really?
Yeah.
Because
You go to,
I
let's
go
see,
to-
where are you?
if I go to
And
Human
they're
Rights
linked
Commission
to Legislature
by
online
date
as well.
2017.
I've never seen it like that. It's interesting.
Seen it, like, I had trouble accessing it.
If you go to the Legistar,
Sometimes.
So just
From
go
the main
to-
page on Human Rights, there's nothing for the year of 2017. There's like 8 for 2016, but But done nothing for 2017. Not even by month.
Yeah, I actually
see
had some
anything, David?
trouble.
Sorry.
Once they didn't put it up for weeks, and
I don't see
Yeah,
anything
that's
for
good.
2017
We can ask
right now.
our personnel.
Like
or
for the entire year.
for the whole year.
Yeah.
They're
Oh,
also linked, so if you go to the Legistar listing of the meetings online,
Yeah, they're all
they are
there.
linked there as well, but.
Yeah, but
But
like,
it
if-
should be
there
on the
shouldn't be
CTN.
but
any
also
site or
if
not
on our
on
minutes
the-
we're directing it
Yeah,
to something
that's where
like
the
that.
minutes
I
are
only
Right.
went to the CTN site to get the recording, so.
Yeah, so.
so maybe
That's
we
just
should tell them
Can
to
you
do that
access
instead.
those now with CPN? Is it working for you?
I've always been able to find the videos there.
Oh,
So
yeah.
specifically.
I don't know why. It's not, I don't have it, but she does.
Hmm.
It's interesting.
I've had trouble with the link. I also had trouble, they don't play on Mozilla. I don't know why, but they
I wonder
don't.
if that's why you have a different browser. This is not.
Yeah.
Oh, but you have the 26.
It came up now.
Now it came up,
Yeah.
okay.
Oh, okay.
So my by date work
Yeah.
link does not work either. There's nothing there,
Yeah,
like under 2017. Oh, yeah, there wasn't.
there wasn't for a second though, right? That's weird, okay, well,
But under the general
Yeah.
HRC folder, they're all there.
I copied the link
Yeah.
from the bottom of the agenda into my browser, went there, it brought me to the page, I had to click, I think, on government at the top, or maybe it just would have been under video on demand, but at least in that video on demand section on the left, if you scroll down
yeah, I see
to Human
them,
Rights Commission.
I see them now, but
Oh.
it wasn't showing up for
Hmm.
Yeah.
a moment.
That's on,
No, no.
okay.
Creating problems.
Uh,
trying to.
Another thing having to do with
Yeah.
communications is a question that people asked last meeting. I know that there was some concern that there were messages that we sometimes would like to put in the minutes somehow, and could they be put in somewhere? It turns out that Commission Communications is a place where we can put anything the commissioner wants to say. So if David, you want to say that there's a meeting or an event or a training, you can make that comment. If somebody wants to make a comment about something that was discussed or wasn't discussed, you could do that. So that's one way that we could get our message out.
That would be a section in our
We-
minutes, or?
We could put it in, it's a section actually is a section in the city council
Yeah, like,
meetings.
yeah, like council communication, we can say anything about
Right,
any topic
and it's in the
that we may
minutes.
put there and it'll be in the minutes, exactly.
So
Yeah.
it's a way, Dwight, you were concerned that
Mhm.
sometimes you had you wanted people to know that you'd raised this issue,
Yep.
for example.
So we should add that every.
And we
to the
could,
agenda
and so one of my
every time.
questions is, if we added it, should it be at the end or at the beginning of the meeting?
Oh.
It's usually the beginning.
And at the beginning, it would be, it would allow you to say something about the last month's agenda, that something happened that you saw was not in the minutes, and therefore you wanted to add them.
Mm.
If it were at the end, you wouldn't know if it was in the minutes or
Actually,
not.
don't we have council communication both at the beginning and the end?
Yeah, the opportunity.
do, right?
have
Oh,
the
you do?
opportunity to say at the
Oh, okay.
beginning and the end.
Yeah, so,
Because we
yeah.
added at the end, I think, to address specific comments that may come up in
Yeah,
public comment.
exactly, otherwise it's not like we don't respond to it,
Yeah.
right? Somebody comes and speaks,
Oh,
and then
and-
we have to wait till the next meeting, they
Yeah.
feel like we are not responding to them, right?
So we have the
Ah.
opportunity after the last public comment at the end of the
Okay.
council meeting.
Would you like to have Commissioner Communications
Why
on
not?
this agenda? And
Sure.
would you like
Yes.
it both at the beginning and the end?
Sure.
Can I see hands?
Although you do one public commentary, so maybe, we did it
You
specifically
do two
because there was
public
two
commentaries,
public
yes.
commentaries, so.
Yeah,
But maybe one's enough.
Yeah, well, you're right, I would think you could put it in there after the public comments.
Okay.
And I don't see the harm, except for in terms of time, I mean, if we were worried about time, but it might well be
Ask
at
it
the end
before
of
the end.
at the end of the meeting that we just finished. You could say, is there anything that anybody wants to be sure makes it into the commissioner communications that will be in the minutes for this meeting.
Okay,
And give people a couple minutes to say what they want to say.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Sure,
Yeah.
see how it goes.
Does anybody have any objections to that? Okay, let's try it. The other thing that Frost, Christopher Frost said was that we can do it as a resolution. And we wouldn't even need all the whereases, we could just make a resolution that said, we feel strongly about this issue, or whatever, but we could make a
To
resolution.
put it in the communications room?
We could do it in the meeting, we could,
Oh, just say it.
or just formulate
Oh.
just, if what I asked Christopher Frost was if we had strong feelings about something but no action and didn't know where it would go in the, and it's not in the minutes, how would we express it? And these are ways we could express it.
Okay.
Good point.
Okay. Incorporating guest presentations. Rick is ill, and so he can't answer this, but I actually picked up an envelope, 2 envelopes from Sarah, and one of them gave dates, and one of them was returned because there was no such addressee.
Which organizations were those for?
Fair Housing did respond, and Wicker did not. I mean, it bounced back. They didn't.
Yeah.
I don't know who he sent it to. Not a person I knew.
Okay.
So, so we are getting, and what Rick's comment was that he was going to follow up on the notes that he sent on the 23rd. He sent 5, and he did hear from ACLU, and plans to call them in a week or so. So we know where that is. Pam, status of complaints?
So there are no new ones on the phone, but there is the one that I'm actually investigating, which is a carryover. We received, you may recall, at the last meeting, the actual complaint from the complainant. It's a disability-based complaint based on public accommodation. I contacted personally the respondent because I called, I don't know how many times, and it just rang. But I verified that it is the correct number, and I called tonight and they answered. But this was after I had physically gone to the respondent's location. The owner-manager is out of the country, and I did not want to speak with just an employee. But the person at the reception area assured me that they would contact the owner to let them know that the Ann Arbor Human Rights Commission has received a complaint against them. I shared with the receptionist my commission card, my business card, with my name on it, and then just highlighted the commission's phone number. And the receptionist said that the manager owner is due back next Wednesday, and I will follow up then. I apologize, Linda, I did get your email.
No, that's fine.
She offered assistance, just so everyone knows. And it wasn't that I blew her off, it was.
No. I just didn't want you to feel like it was all on your plate.
No, and then it was fine. But I had made every effort, and I don't know why today the phone was answered, and I'd called different times.
No, it's fine.
It didn't go into a recording. It didn't. One time it had a high-pitched whine, which I thought was like a fax. But again, no direct communication until today, when I physically went to the location, and then I subsequently called, and it was answered. So I will follow up perhaps at the next commission meeting, and ideally it can be resolved. Interestingly enough, the receptionist, who I'm calling the person a receptionist, she may have a different title, the person that greets you when you enter the premises, stated that she first asked, when did this incident occur? And I shared with her the time that the complainant had indicated. And her immediate response was, I think I remember that incident. So I haven't been able to contact the owner-manager directly, but as she is reported to be back in the country as of next week, then I'll follow up and then advise the commission accordingly. I have not received any other written communique via the email or the website or regular mail.
Yeah.
So those are that's the only one that I'm aware of.
So your next step would just be to listen to what the owner-manager has to say, basically.
Right, right. And I know that this is kind of new for us, but I think all of this ends up being our precedent of how we,
Right.
do future investigations.
Right.
And I'm reminded of my days when I worked for the government as an investigator, and we always gave the responding party a copy of the complaint. You can redact the information, but I just wondered if that wasn't something we would want to consider doing, because it becomes public at that point. And certainly with the other agencies that are engaged in this same effort, that's exactly what they do. They send a copy of the complaint along with questions and ask the responding party to respond within a certain period of time with supporting documentation. So since we're kind of new at this, I just wondered if that wasn't something we wanted to incorporate.
I would think that you could ask the complainant whether she wants to keep her identity, private, at least at this stage, or whether she's comfortable with having it shared with the place of business, public accommodation. And bless you,
And
if she is.
Let her know that.
I don't know, that's just, what do you think?
Planning to.
I think that
Sure.
seems reasonable.
I just wondered because
It's a good
I'm just
question.
basing it on my experience
Yeah.
with the agencies.
Yeah.
It does make
Once
sense.
you file that complaint, it technically becomes public.
And I don't know if that's really the case in our case.
Well, my question is, let's say that it's happened, I'm just doing this because I want us to determine what we're going to do
Sure.
Right.
across the board, no matter
Yeah,
what.
right.
The person wants, this to be resolved and to receive the service that they felt they were entitled to, which by law they were. So if you keep them anonymous, and let's say that this has happened to more than one person, then how does the responding party say, well, unless you just, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It
right.
just gets a little,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it seems to me that in the natural, I'm sorry. It seems to me that in the natural course of an investigation, if it starts out with the person saying, I don't want my identity disclosed to the other party, I think what we would do is we would go as far as we could in the investigation and the resolution process without doing that. And if it got to a point where it made sense to bring the parties together, obviously at that point, the person's identity would be revealed. I mean, I don't think it creates a big, a big problem.
And I was thinking of a case that I handled where it would have been a problem because the person, rather than just writing the facts, wrote their guesses about what was behind what they were thinking, and you know how some people write, and you wouldn't want. I don't think you'd want the respondent to be biased by that kind of information as well. You really want just the facts, what their complaint actually is. Sometimes people, the way they express themselves includes things that would make the respondent less likely to settle.
I guess what I would say is we're never going to be able to control what
That's true.
complainant writes on a form or as part of the complaint. And I think that I have faith in us, the commission, to handle these complaints and this process in a way that will enable it to go forward, even if the complainant writes things that are not necessarily only factual and might even be upsetting to the respondent. I mean, part of the point is that the respondent needs to understand how upset the complainant is in some of these. And I think, I guess I am not worried about it. I completely understand why you want to protect someone, but if a complainant is coming forward, is making a complaint, they're not sure how far they want to go or how identified they want to be early on, fine.
Mhm.
But I just think we can smooth these things over on a case-by-case basis. I have faith that we can do that.
Okay.
I don't know, maybe others disagree.
And we might say, as if they talk to us before writing the complaint, we might explain that the process includes showing them that complaint.
So from my question, procedurally, what are we doing?
Oh, you know what, they might not want, you know what, they might not want the person's phone number and contact information.
Oh, right.
Well, you can
that's
redact
easy.
that,
Okay.
because you're
Yes.
just gonna make a copy
Okay.
to give to the respondent, and you can, from that copy, redact the information that,
Exactly.
you know.
That you might
So all
redact.
I'm saying is procedurally, as a commission, how are we governing ourselves? Are we
Right.
giving a copy to the responding party with the permission of the complainant?
Mhm.
Or are we just, or is that part of our process? That
That's
the
what I'm
respondent
asking.
will get it,
Right.
Mhm.
and then
Right.
whether or not the name is on it maybe is.
Well, I think we can decide, we would just redact the information, even if the complaining party gives permission, you know, just,
Mhm. For starters.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
because ideally, you can expedite this.
Mhm.
Many times, responding parties, this is the first time they're hearing or learning of something, and so they're already feeling a little defensive.
Sure.
And our role is to be neutral, independent individuals who are simply trying to resolve an issue.
Right.
So however we can do that expeditiously without compromising the integrity of the investigation or harming either party,
Mhm.
I would just like to know what we're going to do as a commission
Yeah.
when we
Okay.
do investigations.
Okay. So have we agreed that yes, we will have them, show the complaint to them with redacted information about their contact information?
Subject to their permission,
Mhm.
yeah.
Um,
Because that's the initial investigation. You're contacting the other side,
Right.
and you know, we've received a complaint,
Right.
and we're here to look into that. We'd like to speak to the responsible party.
Right.
And who is that?
In my experience, though, I think in most cases, I've never seen the respondent. I've always been on the phone.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea of actually, I mean, you can, I suppose, email it or
Mhm.
send it, but typically I've just stated, you know,
Paraphrased.
explained it,
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
you know, on the phone. So
Mhm.
I don't know if we need to be,
Giving it, right?
you know, I don't know. I think we have to maybe still be flexible about
Mhm.
communicating the information in a way that, given that our lack of resources, we have
Mhm.
none,
Yeah.
you know, and we're volunteers.
Right.
Maybe play it by ear a little bit, but
Mhm.
certainly communicating, especially, I think her complaint is pretty brief, right? So you
It's a
can,
couple of sentences.
so you can read it over
And
the
that includes her
phone, you know.
resolution.
Right, so, you know, you can just read it, you know, I mean, in some
Right.
way, I think
Mhm.
would be fine.
Yeah.
So, just to make it easier for us.
Mhm. Okay.
Yeah,
Um,
thank you.
Mhm.
Thank you, yes. I just want to say something about the Michigan Equality Index, which I have here. It was completed. We did get 100%, actually, I think 106%, Heather. So we're
Which is higher than last year.
very excited about that.
Is that an A+?
Excuse me.
We get all the
You know-
available points.
I had a teacher who worked for me, used to give grades over 100. And I called her in one day, the first time she did it to me. I said, how can this one person have 112, this one have 123, this have a 98? What does this mean? I mean, what percentage are you working with? So how do we have 106?
No, we really
We
have,
got bonus
it adds up
points.
to 106, but they say our final score is
Is
100
100.
Have extra
anyway.
credit.
Okay.
Extra credit.
That'll work.
We
That-
do, we get
that
extra
will work.
credit.
That will
Yeah.
work. That will work, man.
And the Human Resources filled it out? Is that,
Yeah, it didn't actually change from last year.
it didn't change at all? Okay, and that's
No, and I
good. It
can-
does usually,
I can
has,
forward on the requirements. They were online, but they didn't change, which was unusual. So
it is
we were
unusual.
able to add the Ann Arbor Public Schools because all that information, because it did get passed. And
Yes.
I sent them everything regarding the meeting it was passed in and the final document.
Great.
Everything, and they were really appreciative.
Well,
for
thank
that
you.
information.
Okay, thanks for doing that.
And please thank Human Resources for us for having it done. That's important.
I shared that with a number of people, and one response was, that wouldn't have been the score if blacks had been measured.
Was it black? Yes, that's right. In fact, I think this is a very good thing that the Michigan Equality, or I guess Equality,
Human Rights Campaign.
Human Rights Campaign came up with, because people are scurrying to at least put them in place, and we're scurrying to put them in place and make them valuable. And in fact, I want you to know that if you remember, why can't I think of his first name? Brad O'Fury is going to come next month. I asked him if he wanted an extra month because this was going to be a busy meeting, and he said, sure, I'd love it. But he was working on it, and I think he will be here next month, and that'll be very good. The next thing, you don't need.
Can I ask a question real quick?
Sure.
I'm just going back over the changes that you made to the minutes. Are you okay if we have to keep, under adjournment, the, translation or sign language service, which is shown as a red on here?
Oh, yeah.
We might have to keep it.
Oh, sure. Did you mean to?
It's auto-generated now.
I didn't mean to keep it, because I didn't think.
Didn't mean to cross it out. You mean.
I did mean to cross it out, because
Really?
we actually didn't, we said we wanted that statement without the.
But it says citizens requiring translation or
So if I
sign
need
language
to arrange
services?
for a sign language interpreter to come to a meeting, they have to know that they only,
Yeah,
like,
that's
if
different.
they request
Oh,
it
is that
less
okay?
than 2 days.
Yeah, because
Well, we never
sometimes-
had anything like that
No,
before,
but
though.
that's different than saying, if you want to review the meeting, you can go here. Is there a reason not to?
No, it's not,
Yeah.
but I didn't know that there was a reason to have it. It's nice.
It seems to be city policy.
It's on all the public meeting postings as
Oh,
well.
it wasn't on ours.
It's on the one posted in the hallway
Oh,
with
okay,
all the dates on it and everything. It's
Okay.
auto-generated.
I
okay.
think it
Through
should definitely be
Legistar,
on there.
so-
Fine,
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
fine.
All right, thank you.
I can
Also-
take it off if I talk to the clerk's office about it, I'm sure.
Don't
but-
make
No,
a big
no,
deal
no,
about
no,
that.
no,
That would be
no,
not
No,
you.
I think, actually, there was another thing on the minutes, I know we already voted on it, but you weren't sure who had
That's right.
seconded.
And it's not in my notes, so
You know.
It's mumbled on the video and it didn't flash
Yeah,
that
I
light,
mean-
so I don't.
We can make it up.
guess it's Linda.
Okay,
That's
but
what
then
I always say
default.
with me when I don't know. Police review project, I'm wondering if we shouldn't schedule a work meeting
For us?
after the 16th, and before our next meeting.
I wonder if it should be before the 16th.
Oh, you wanted it before the
I don't
16th?
know. I got worried. I was so glad you asked that question because.
I was like, who's going to be speaking in between?
Exactly. Well, no, I mean, I have
It'll be interactive.
Yeah.
You'll be,
Yeah.
generally how it's set up is the commissioners, you'll have commissioner, council members, you'll sit every other, kind of one around.
Oh, we
and
will.
It's an interactive question and answer.
Mhm.
It's a work session to talk
Okay.
about, in this case, I think the presentation and then questions you have based on reading through the report,
Okay.
or points of clarification.
Okay.
So, it'll be
Okay.
chaired, Mayor Taylor will chair the meeting.
Chair it? Okay.
And it's pretty free-flowing in terms of, there's not a lot, other than kind of the beginning and the end, there's not a lot of formal pomp and circumstance.
Do you raise your hand if you want to be recognized?
Yeah, and then, you can catch the attention or,
Yeah,
as a
okay.
break comes, you interject,
Okay.
so.
All right.
My guess is there's going to be an awful lot of, we'll get things from city council that we weren't expecting, and from one another and from her.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't
So
know
I
that,
guess-
I think
yeah, guess
we
not.
need to plan afterwards. I'm not sure if we
Afterwards.
need to plan before.
So we can have a work session, you mean, that's not televised? Is that what you're saying?
Uh, It doesn't,
would
it has to be open, it
announced.
doesn't
It'd
have to be
open and
televised.
announced.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fine.
If all of you are here, but
If
if
you have
it's
a
less than
quorum.
a quorum, you want
No, but we
to,
would want it
just-
to be all of us. I
okay.
think, if we did. Unless
Yeah.
we can just discuss it at our next meeting. I mean,
Well, we can, if we think we can wait that long.
yeah.
I wasn't clear that once this session takes place and a determination is made when it would be adopted, whatever. the outcome is.
I think that we're gonna have to talk it over first,
Yeah, I
and make
think
some
because-
extra proposals. And
Yeah, because it could be multiple resolutions, ordinance change, because if there's going to be a joint committee, because our charter does allow to have a committee, just like you have a Parks Advisory Committee. It does allow for civilian input to oversee the police department. So that would be an ordinance change, like new ordinance saying that there would be blah, 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 committee, and it shall be who will appoint the members, how many members, how is it constituted.
That's where the issues are gonna be.
Yeah,
the
things
details.
like that,
Yeah.
yeah, so that could be an ordinance change, so.
I
there's
think
a-
any charter, a charter change has to go before the voters.
This
Yeah,
is
it's
not a
charter
charter change,
No,
this
it
is an
allows-
ordinance change.
It would just be an ordinance change, yeah. No, but I mean, the process of getting from the report to creating that ordinance,
Yeah.
figuring out what the details of this group.
So it has
will
to
be.
go through our legal department and
And
then,
then with.
But we're gonna want some things that aren't in the
Absolutely.
original proposal, and we'll maybe wanna
Yeah,
take out
so
some
I-
things.
I mean, I guess just ongoing discussions with city council then.
Yeah.
And the
So-
city manager.
But still, I'm still not
Yeah,
clear.
Right.
The purpose of the meeting then is just to discuss the report, not
And ask
necessarily.
questions if Deborah
Right.
will be
Okay,
here.
but not necessarily come to any definitive determination.
City council will have to do that, right?
Understood, and they would
Yeah.
do it with our input, but I'm saying we would communicate our whatever
absolute,
Yeah.
during that meeting.
absolutely.
So
Well-
after that meeting, would we know what is gonna happen?
No,
I don't
because
think
then
so, no.
council has to, like, some of us have to take resolutions, ordinance change. There might be a resolution to ask the city administrator to work with the legal department. I would see the ordinance change has to be done to set up this committee.
But it can't be left to the city attorney to determine the details
No,
of this.
no,
It
no,
has
no.
to have.
They'll make a
No.
recommendation.
Yes,
and then
correct.
Yeah.
What we can and can't do, and then, I think it's gonna be an ongoing process.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I think probably the biggest thing is that we get an idea of what we want, or what's desired, so we can get it into the budget. So it can get budgeted, and then, there can be resources behind it to actually be able to do what needs to be done.
What's the deadline for the budget? That would be
Well, the
sometime.
administrator will develop, make his recommendations. It'll be, we have our final budget meeting in May, but it's gonna be an addition because it'll be the second year of the two-year budget. But that'll be the key thing is, and Mr. Lazarus hit on that, that, the timing's good because we can ask for the additional funds that, the Hillard Heights contract to come in to help do the implementation for it, and then any other funds that'll be needed. And then also for, I think what we'll see probably with the police department, because there's recommendations based on type, is start putting together some type of plan. What's the strategic hiring plan that we need to look at to be able to hire officers or, resources needed within the police department to be able to make some of the other recommended changes. To more community outreach, or and more robust community engagement section, however it comes about. But that then puts it in line that we can actually do something, vice, like to do something, that we actually get resources behind it.
So it sounds like
It's
the
an
rough
evolving, it's gonna be an
deadline is
evolving process. I would say probably,
by the spring.
we can accept, the council can accept the report from Hillard Hines, and then realizing, I think, as Mr. Lazarus said, we own it, start what we can and can't do, or what we want to do in terms of putting things together.
Which reminds me that when the city council wouldn't accept our report, they would just receive our report.
And there's a difference in the language.
I know. So I'll be curious to see what you do with Hillard Hines.
Well,
At the very least, they'll acknowledge that the report exists.
especially since it's supposed to be out there by tomorrow, right? But I'm being a little proactive.
Yeah.
Because assuming that it's published tomorrow, public comes, they're going to ask the same question. When is this going to happen? What's the timeline for all of this to?
Is that why?
So that's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Got it.
So expect that question, and it won't be because I prompted somebody to ask.
Well, that's for the mayor and the city administrator to answer.
Speaking of language, there were two very unfortunate things, I think, in there. One, she referred to it as a committee instead of commission, and that would make it different than anything else we have in the city, right? Yeah. And the second is her use of the word soft. When you're looking at a masculine group, such as the police, that's the energy they have, or a football team, or my family, and you say soft, I don't know anybody that wants to raise their hand and say, yeah, I'm soft. I wish that they had used different language.
You mean instead of soft skills?
Because she was talking about interpersonal relationships, and interpersonal relationships are not soft.
No.
You know.
That's right.
No.
That's right.
No,
Yeah.
that's a common term, though.
That's a
It's a very common term,
Yeah.
the soft skills.
I
It
understand.
must be, but it is unfortunate.
Do you want to come up with a tentative date to meet before our next meeting, or just wing it?
I don't know.
Is that
I mean, if you
with
think
it?
about it, the 16th, and then it's going to be Thanksgiving.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And I think our meeting, isn't it like the 9th or something?
It was something like that.
It's pretty early in the month.
Do you want to hold off?
I was wondering, do we want to, so we shouldn't try to coordinate questions for Deborah after reading
It's the
this?
13th, the next
Oh,
meeting.
it's the 13th?
Yeah. It's not better.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
We can, and
Do you want to
one
decide after the
possibility is to
meeting?
have just a couple people, or,
Why
you
don't
know,
you do that? Go ahead.
do more
Yeah.
informally until the 13th, unless there's a
Okay.
deadline for some reason.
Because I definitely find it helpful when brainstorm about concepts, and while you're talking about this whole thing, I know what has been bugging me about this. There's less checks and balances
Yes.
in this, and that was
We
the
wa-
whole.
we want-
Remember,
want
we
that
all
one.
started off with police cannot police themselves. This is all kind of a kumbaya. How do we all get together and go and reach out so all these things wouldn't happen? But we know in society bad things do happen, and when those things happen, what do we have as checks and balances?
Absolutely.
So this is why I really appreciate
Yeah.
coming to public discussions
Yeah.
or these kinds of forums, because then it begins to kind of gel, right? You have these uneasy feelings reading the report, and
When did you receive it? Yesterday also?
a couple of days ago,
A
yeah.
couple of days ago. Yeah, because we just got it.
Right, and you would have gotten it at
Yesterday,
11,
so we didn't
he
have
sent
to-
it to me at 11 o'clock.
Oh,
I
maybe
sent it to-
yesterday.
I sent it
Feels
4.
like, because I've been thinking about it, maybe I did get it yesterday
Yeah,
at
'cause
11.
we-
Yeah, I
Feels
think
like
you,
to-
I think you did actually.
Okay, got it.
So, yeah, I mean, I haven't had time to read it thoroughly,
No.
so.
So I think.
Look at
talking through this-
also transparency. We need some kind of checks and balances to make sure that transparency doesn't go away. Because we can't do, what I don't want is that this group is sort of the,
An
the
advisory group?
advisory, I was thinking of the cookies and coffee group for the police, which it could,
Exactly. Yeah,
it
that's
could
right.
be if it doesn't have any.
Any teeth, exactly. And we were warned during public hearings that is this going to be kind of a window dressing, or is it going to be actually
Right.
meaningful?
And that's why-
It's not about, because I think people get confused that we are somehow or other going to hire and fire police. No, we don't
it's
have
not
that
about the
power.
discipline. It's just.
But we
Someone looking over their
systemic
shoulder.
problems,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Are there systemic problems? Are there failure of procedures? Is
Right.
there failure of policies? I mean,
looking at the big picture.
And you've got to
from a
know what's
critical
going
eyes.
on more intimately in order to know whether those policies are failing. I mean, we can make policies all day,
Right.
but
But
unless we
Context.
really understand. I mean,
Context,
just seeing, just here, pairing it with this case, you see some things that
You've
you
got-
you would never have thought of before.
That's why, yeah, there has to be, this body has to have some access
Yes.
to the internal workings of the police
that
department. You know, there are ways to make that happen
And
without
is it
compromising.
you? Yeah, you
people's-
said that, have a number. I mean, you don't need to know the
Because without
names.
that, it's really.
And the report does talk about like successful civilian boards that we could model off of that do
Yeah.
have the ability to look at individual incidents. But it doesn't seem to me that they're suggesting anything like that.
No, they're not.
No.
The thing that occurred to me was along those lines of this, whatever it becomes, having access to, and there seemed to be either some pushback or reluctance to give this body that authority. I know from personal experience that if it were the governmental agency that were looking into, let's say, this Cayenne-Slayton matter, they don't have the luxury of saying, no, it's an internal matter. And if they refuse, they can subpoena, and they can get. I know, because I've done it. My point is, why even go through that entire exercise? Because no good comes from that. You automatically have the defenses that go up, the belief that they're hiding something, and then where's the transparency? The other piece of that is, I think it clearly needs to be defined what transparency means, because clearly it means different things to different
Yes.
people. And one of the things that I saw in the response to this incident is it didn't really give people what I know that they want, and they could have been a little bit more forthcoming without telling all, if you will.
Sure.
I also know from personal trained experience that the EEOC and other governmental agencies, when they write a recommendation, because it's acted by a commission, that they have one summary paragraph that clearly states the facts and how they arrived at them. Not this, okay, yeah, it happened, but no fault on behalf of the police officer.
Yeah.
Here's the question, and you raised it earlier, and I don't know that we'll ever get the answer. But I'm saying this for a point, because if this is the kind of thing that we're going to see going forward, we might as well stop now.
I would say you need to hold this conversation until the appropriate people are in the room to be
To have it.
because I think it's very easy to go down a path
Yeah.
and start making assumptions about what is or isn't going to be or what
Yeah,
happens.
right.
I think in what we saw with the young gentleman with the Blake Center, one of the difficulties is he's a minor.
Right.
And the other people were all minors, a lot of the other participants. So the police in the city, again, I'm not an attorney or anything, they're limited on what they can and can't release because of the impact it can have on those young people's lives long-term in terms of, because you think of the young man now in terms of if you're an employer and you put his name in, you're looking and you see that,
But if you redact his name in the reports and that never shows up.
that report, but it's on social media.
Sure, but that's
And
already
it gets
there.
out, but I'm just saying,
It's already
We
out
didn't do that.
but I'm just saying that there are limitations
Yeah, but if
that
you were
they're
to
operating
have a
under, and I
summary of
think
facts and it
Mr.
makes
Lazarus
it
has
look
made the
bad,
commitment
that would be
that
summary.
once he
Like,
gets
it
the
would
final
redact his
documents, he's
name.
gonna
It would.
get what he's comfortable getting out there
Right.
that protects the young people,
agree.
but gets the information out there.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it takes time, the process takes time.
Part of that process had better be an apology to the boy. Because it was a public humiliation. Somebody needs to apologize if he didn't break any laws.
It doesn't seem like you're interested in doing anything resembling that.
I know
Or
it.
even sitting down and having a discussion to review what happened and
I
who
thought-
did what and why.
I agree with you. I thought it was extremely offensive. Like a lot of the response was extremely offensive, including the comment that most people thought that this was really great. Like we did a really great job here. Because most of the people talking to the police thought that we did
If
a
that
great
had been
job.
my boy,
I don't
it'd
know
have been
who-
a hell of a
yeah.
lot different.
Yeah, that was one of the comments that like
I
most
know,
people thought.
I know.
That was the gentle.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, the other reason why I mentioned that is because I received an email, and I deliberately didn't share it, with this commission, but it is out there. And tomorrow is the 3rd anniversary of the Ora Rosser killing. And they are going to be, there is a vigil that is planned. The reason why I mention it is because it follows so closely on the heels of the incident with Cain. And it's going to be brought up to support, since this report is going to be out there tomorrow, I see a lot of this coming to a head, because even if it's not relevant or appropriate and comparable, comparisons are going to be made and comments made to justify why we should have, and then what it should look like, and things like that. So I think the more that we can talk and maybe reemphasize the things that we put in our initial report as based on our experience and our work of what we believe should occur. I agree that it should be made to the parties that will be present at the meeting next week. But I'm a little concerned that we're still not hearing the public, or at least they're feeling that they're not being heard, because the questions that they ask aren't being answered. You know, so I don't know how we make that happen, but I just think that we should be thinking about that so that when we have the meeting next week, all of that gets stated and incorporated, and then whatever ultimately ends up happening, then, you know.
I'm interested in seeing like how much outreach the police actually did conduct, because they only talked to one kid. I wonder how many kids were actually reached out to, because I know one of the kids who was there, and I've talked to them about it, and they have a very negative take on the entire situation, and I don't know if they were ever approached.
You know that is one of the problems with this kind of reaction, which is legal but probably not best possible way to handle it, is that instead of de-escalating, it escalated. And it was actually dangerous. There was a taser drawn. People could have gotten hurt, but people who aren't hurt have at least lower opinion of police and lower trust. I mean, it did not help. It was not the overall outcome of this was negative, even though he wasn't charged.
For the observers and for him.
Yes.
And like in the report, they said like one kid was spoken to. Like one kid out of how many? Like how many kids did you even try to talk to? Like which kids did you try to talk to? Like one out of context is meaningless. Like, is it one kid because you only tried to talk to one kid? To like 10 kids refuse you? Like, what does it mean by just one kid?
What I found interesting is what you said, Dwight. How does a fight between two women end up with a single black male being on the ground who wasn't involved in the fight? And then right after that, or right after the incident was recorded, it was reported that because that person didn't produce requisite ID, remember we had the discussion around this table, do you have to produce an ID when asked? And the answer came back, even from the chief, no. No, you don't.
And it's interesting now that the reason for like him being taken to the ground is that he maybe brushed an officer's face. Like the ID thing isn't being used anymore, so they're like switching the benchmarks.
I also heard that he didn't cooperate with the police. The police told him to leave, and he didn't leave.
And didn't he also say he had used a bad word or something?
And used
well,
a
that's
bad
the
word.
result of the investigation.
But none of these I don't think are felonies.
But and I shared this with Leslie, in this particular incident, right after it occurred, because I think we had a commission meeting, the school that this person attends had not issued the IDs. So the student didn't have
No,
it.
the IDs aren't even.
I know.
Non-issue. Let's not even go
there.
there.
I mean, that's not even.
I know,
And we're
but
not,
but
we really can't make a decision on this case.
No,
We
and
don't
it's
have
not
the
our
information.
job.
But
I'm not suggesting that we can. What I am
A
saying
lot of questions.
is next
Questions.
week,
We can't make a
week,
decision, but we can ask the question.
understood. Next week, I'm just saying, be prepared for this.
Yeah.
Because this is significant, the fact that the city has committed resources and has engaged in this effort to get us this far, you're still going to have public going off on tangents. Well, what about this? Well, what about this? And you know what I mean? And I'm not saying that we're the ones who should answer that. They should appropriately be directed to, you know, Hillard Hines, who completed the thing. But I'm saying we too also need to be concerned about how do we really want, if this goes forward, it to be.
Well, let me ask you this. We asked a number of questions. We got answers. I told the chief that we would be back to him. Should we be asking more questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, would you
Well,
mind?
Howard just committed to answering, finding some of those
One
answers.
yes.
No, and also committed to trying to get more of a report.
Oh, okay,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
true.
So I think we should just let him do his thing.
It's his
for now.
responsibility. He'll,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that,
right.
and that's
That's
what,
true.
he
Right.
committed to getting that based on the information he can release and what he
Right.
can,
That's
and to get the best information back.
Right.
Okay.
And
make it
given that
publicly-
we're
and make it
dealing with a
publicly
minor,
available.
And and
Yeah.
I mean, I hope he's discreet about it.
I mean, general questions like what Trespass Act, like
Oh,
what,
that's
where
different.
where is
Yeah.
that? Because I've
Yeah,
been
no,
Googling it
that's-
all meeting. I
Yeah.
don't know what the hell they're talking about.
Well, you couldn't
I've-
find it?
I can't find it. I
Really?
found
Oh.
ones for University of Michigan and for EMU,
Ah.
and
Probably not.
also other different organizations referring to being red trespass. But I still have no idea what the basis for being red trespass is.
Yeah.
And I've been looking at Westlaw as well, and I can't tell.
I
And for trespass warning, like Michigan has like a really good policy for like the 4 instances in which you can be red trespass, and also what your appellate rights are.
Oh.
Like there's nothing like that that
It
seems
must
to
be in a
exist to
state
me for
statute.
like.
State criminal statute? I
It's
don't know.
not
Do
a it's
trespass?
not a criminal offense.
Well-
The Baird said it was a civil offense.
I just wonder if it would be in a trespass statute.
Some
though,
of the
because-
documents I would refer to a Michigan Trespass Act, but there's
Yeah.
nothing titled that.
Oh, really?
Huh.
Well, Howard said he would find out, so we'll see. He's got a city attorney to ask.
Didn't we look at that up, David?
Do we look at?
We looked that up, and we found a Michigan trespass.
Yeah, we
Oh,
did.
so maybe it's a
Yes.
Michigan law, not
Yeah.
a city
Michigan.
ordinance.
No,
Right, I don't know. I
It's not
wasn't
a city
convinced that what
ordinance,
we
and that's why
found was.
it's part
Yeah.
of the Michigan Municipal Code.
Right, all right.
Because if I
State
look up
criminal.
Michigan Trespass Act, I only
And the-
get like 4 like PDFs.
You mean an MCL? Michigan,
Yeah.
collective laws? Yeah, I wasn't, my recollection of our
Yeah,
work was that I wasn't 100%
No.
convinced that we had found the
yeah.
applicable law. You know, look, what I will say is something that Linda said at the very beginning of the meeting, which is, or is echo what Linda said at the very beginning of the meeting, which is, you know, I think probably at this table there may well be some disagreements. I don't even know where I stand in terms of how much authority should this board, whatever it is, have about complaint review or complaint oversight, you know, within the parameters of the current law. Should we try to change the law, et cetera? I don't know where I stand on that. But look, I think that if we get to a point where what a board or committee like this can do is have a discussion that involves the police, out of which comes some information that the committee can help publicize to the community so that the community can have a better understanding about what happened. And I'm not saying do it behind the police's back, do it in conjunction with the
Yes.
police so that there is greater understanding about what did go on. Taking into account the different, you know, the tensions, the privacy, that kind of thing.
Sure.
There are ways to sit down together with reasonable people, all with the goal of making police-community relations better and giving the community, which includes, or part of the basis of which will be making sure the community has the information it needs so that it can, you know, understand what the police did, which will lead to more trust. Right, I mean, that's to me the sort of thing that I'm hopeful will come out of this.
But
And
then,
that
so
is
that
something-
group would have to have access to more information.
Well, right, and so
that's
those are the
the
things that
question.
need to be worked
Right,
out.
Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But that is a need that the police have. They're not good at that at all. And that's caused a lot of problems where the police could have said something, I mean, you can imagine what they could have said that wouldn't have violated anybody's privacy, but would have made what they did a little bit more reasonable sounding and more honest even. I mean, in some ways, their silence makes you more skeptical that they did the right thing.
Well, at the very least, it raises questions.
Yeah, and
I understand.
And
that.
you know, I think the police can also say, we're looking, we don't know if this is certainly legal, we finding this is legal, but it may not be the best way to do it, and we're looking for other ways. I mean, I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
I had 10 questions and I didn't ask all of them because he said that Lazarus said he was going to go back and he was going to talk with the police chief. And if he doesn't give answers then I have some more.
Okay, so I think I will write back to the chief and tell him that the city administrator is bringing some of our questions, and we may get back to him if we still don't know everything. We have an ordinance, and I think it's too late for us to.
Resolution?
Yeah, resolution rather, yes, thank you.
What time is it?
It's, I'm fine.
9:06.
It's 9:06, it's,
Okay, so can we wait till the next meeting?
I think it can wait.
Yeah, Corinne sent out the email saying that she was soliciting comments over the next week for next month's meeting.
Yeah, and then well, we went back and forth. She wasn't sure whether it would happen tonight. I sent her some comments. She rewrote it, and I don't know if you saw the rewritten version, just really quickly. The last paragraph, maybe I'll just send out my changes to everybody. I sent them to her. She has, the resolution is called Resolution Condemning Hate Crimes, and to form the Ann Arbor Community Response Group. There already is a community response group, it's just dormant.
Yeah.
So I think we want to say to reconvene.
And say that it was
and the
formed
same
in
the resolve
2010
and say more about what it
yeah.
is, because I know when Howard heard about it, he thought, well, maybe we don't need more of these, but it already exists. We just want to reactivate it.
So are we talking about this now or at the
We
next
don't have
meeting?
to. I just wanted
Yeah.
to say to people that the version that Corinne sent today needs a little bit further editing.
Okay.
That's all.
Just, yeah, not very much, I
Not
think.
very much, but maybe I'll send that to everybody and we can talk about it next time.
Okay. So we
Thank
need
you for your work on it.
Oh,
Yeah.
Corinne did
And
most
Corinne
of
too,
it.
yeah.
Corinne did a great job
Yeah.
with it. Can we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay. David?
Seconded.
Somebody- Vivian? All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, folks.
Okay, thank you.